1994 is the most incredible release year in Hollywood history. It gave us what many consider the finest movie of all time, Shawshank Redemption. Quentin Tarantino, John Travolta, Uma Thurman, and Samuel L. Jackson would all reach their absolute peak in Pulp Fiction. Jim Carrey's output was unrivaled by any comedian in recent history, with The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, and Ace Ventura, the Pet Detective, all released in 1994 as well. The Lion King would also be released in 94 and be instantly crowned Disney's finest. And Leon, the Professional, was the most innovative thriller during the 90s. With all these masterpieces, it sounds almost silly there could be a film that outdoes them all at their best element. One that could connect odd stories better than Pulp Fiction and showcase the triumph of the human spirit as well as Shawshank Redemption does. Yet, that is precisely what Forrest Gump pulls off. He made us laugh like Ace and helped people in need like Leon. Today, we will revisit the magical story of Forrest Gump. The movie starts with an iconic opening scene that fans worldwide unofficially named the Feta scene. As we all know, the Feta flies in whatever direction the wind blows. It doesn't resist, nor try to impose its will on the wind. It simply flies the way the universe wants it to. As the feather falls in front of Forrest and he puts it into his case, we get the first metaphor of the movie. Forrest accepts the life of a feather and is willing to go whichever way life takes him. Forrest grew up in the fictional town of Greenbow, Alabama, where his mother ran a boarding house with many colorful characters fluxing in and out. That is a setup where we see Forrest's extraordinary impact at work for the first time. One fine morning, Forrest made friends with a traveling musician. What Forrest lacked in common with the musician, he more than made up with patience and curiosity, which made him the perfect audience. And what he lacked in leg functionality, he made up with the ability to grab the bull by the horns and go with the flow. He used rapid movements in the only direction his leg braces would allow him to, creating a hit new dance move that people with functioning legs never thought of. That became a repeating theme throughout the movie. Forrest would approach any task by giving it his all, resulting in his limitations becoming his advantage. The movie hammers this idea home as Forrest enters the school bus for the first time. All the schoolmates on the bus see Forrest as handicapped and no one wants Forrest to sit beside them. That, again, works in Forrest's favor. At first glance, this seems like a painful and damaging experience, but in actuality, this is good for Forrest, as bad people are keeping themselves out of his life. When he finally found an accepting bus seat, he found so much more. He found Jenny's eyes, and his life would never be the same. For the sake of discussion in the comments, I emphasize that Jenny didn't judge a stranger based on their appearance and low social status. She was perfectly happy to give Forrest a chance and judge him for herself. That is an essential insight into Jenny's character. As we go through her transgressions later in the video, it's worth keeping in mind that her nature is good and her life experiences molded her into what she becomes. Before we move on with the story, how about a little piece of trivia? Did you know the movie Forrest Gump was based on a novel of the same name? Winston Groom published the book in 1986, and it's surprising how many people have no idea it exists. Generally, people are often afraid to admit they like a movie adaptation better than a literary source. But it needs to be said here. The movie Forrest Gump is far superior to the book Forrest Gump. The movie cut some rough and tough stuff from the source material. like Forrest's fighting career, his 18-plus escapades, and some profanity. The film even shrinks Forrest from a massive 6'6" down to average height. What it cuts down in these more adult themes, it more than makes up for in the sense of dreaminess and wonder. For those curious though, you can still find a copy on Amazon.
Now, my mom always told me that miracles happen every day. Some people don't think so, but they do.
We have now reached, arguably, the most divine scene ever shot. As I write this script, I realize no words will ever do it justice. So I pose a question to you. Was there ever a scene that has more tears shed over it? Is there any individual who doesn't feel joy and celebrate this triumph of the human spirit? If we could show it to an uncontacted tribe, would they also be touched? Every time I watch this scene, I think of the song "What a Beautiful World" by Louis Armstrong, and it all starts with the most iconic one-liner of all time.
Run, Forrest, run! Run, Forrest!
And would you believe it? He could run like the wind blows. It turns out Forrest's childhood doctor was right. His spine was crooked as a politician, but his legs were as strong as he's ever seen. Once again, we see Forrest turn a liability into an asset. Years of heavy metal gears on his legs made him as athletic as anyone, and it would soon pay dividends. One day, Jenny missed school, and Forrest went to her house to check up on her. Forrest didn't understand what he witnessed that day, but the audience was presented with Jenny's horrible situation. I intentionally choose to omit the specifics of Jenny's trauma for a few reasons. First, I suppose everyone watching this video watched the movie and knows what I'm talking about. Second, the motif is so dark and horrible that I refuse to insult people who suffered such a fate with my unprofessional opinion. And third, the platform we are on likes to limit the reach of content that uses specific words. Therefore, from now on, I will refer to that whole ordeal as Jenny's source of trauma. One day, while running away from his bullies, Forrest ran across the football pitch in the middle of the game. He outran all the players by a significant margin and was scouted to the University of Alabama by the legendary coach Paul the Bear Bryant. American football isn't as global a sport as basketball or regular football/soccer. Therefore, I'll explain a few things so international viewers can fully appreciate these scenes. See, in regular football, every player needs to have decent technique on the ball. Central defenders and strikers rely more on their strength than their ball control, but if you can't pass the ball at a certain level, no physical attributes can compensate for that. Similar conclusions can be made about basketball or tennis, but in American football there is a role called the kick returner, and it can be fulfilled without any skill on the ball and almost no tactical knowledge. All you need are quick feet and the ability to dodge people tackling you. I went into detail on all this because now you can realize how life prepared Forrest for this role without anyone ever knowing. His long stride running from bicycles and trucks prepared him for the initial part of the run when he caught the ball, and his swerves off the main road prepared him to juke tackles. Truly, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. And what Forrest was gonna get was become an All-American, meet President John F. Kennedy, and, well, tell him he's gotta pee. CGI in these scenes is phenomenal for the time. The people responsible for it are Ken Ralston and his team at Industrial Light and Magic. Maybe the name Ken Ralston sounds familiar to you. That is because he was one of the key people helping George Lucas develop Star Wars. That was the first of 3 times Forrest would meet the incumbent president of the US. I interpret this as an homage to Forrest's character and perhaps a slight dig at presidents. It is the presidents that change all the time and often end in a bad way. Forrest is the one constant. His football ability, military prowess, and ping pong skills get him to shake hands with presidents, but that comes and goes. It is his character that keeps impacting the world in different ways. Consistently, we are presented with another historic event. The first 2 black students enrolling at the University of Alabama. The whole situation, both in film and real life, was rife with tension. Racism was so rampant that the Ku Klux Klan lurked, waiting to strike. The conflict between the state and federal authorities was staged. The vile stand of George Wallace and his dangerous mantra was the talk of the times. It was an absolute spectacle in so many wrong ways. Yet again, Forrest doesn't care about the spectacle in the slightest and simply does the right thing. Believe it or not, this invariance Forrest shows in challenging situations is the subject of many debates. You probably heard of a concept called hero's journey. In his 1949 book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell postulates that heroes go through 17 identifiable phases of their journey. Through decades, many would present their own models consisting of different phases. 2 phases most agree about are the refusal of the call to action and some change in character, a metamorphosis of sorts. Forrest simply doesn't go through those 2 steps. Well, you can find a lot of opinions online, but basically it's a mess. I couldn't find 2 people who agreed on the answer, let alone a critical mass. If you ever hear someone in real life talk about hero's journey, ask them about Forrest and watch them struggle. But I digress. After graduating from college in 1966, Forrest enlists in the US Army. He would meet his best friend in the world the same way he met the love of his life. Bubba, played brilliantly by Mykelti Williamson, is undoubtedly the most Forrest-like character in the entire movie. They are both honest as the day is long, unjudgmental, and dim-witted. There is one significant difference between the 2, and that's their orientation. While Forrest goes wherever life takes him without any master plan, Bubba is a shrimping man through and through. Almost to the point of hilarity.
Shrimp and potatoes, shrimp burger, shrimp sandwich. That's about it.
Forrest, being focused on what is in front of him, excels in military drills. Bubba, being focused on shrimping life, shares his shrimping plans with Forrest. Life being life, throws them a curveball, a nasty one. Forrest and Bubba get sent to Vietnam, serving with the 9th Infantry Division in the Mekong Delta region under Lieutenant Dan Taylor. The movie spends a reasonable amount of time showing daily routines in Nam that Forrest and Bubba go through, their struggles with unfriendly terrain and alien-like weather. One day, it started raining and didn't quit for 4 months. They've been through every kind of rain there is. Little bitty stinging rain and big ol' fat rain. Rain that flew in sideways. And sometimes rain even seemed to come straight up from underneath. Shoot, it even rained at night. Through all the mud, rain and hardships, Forrest keeps Bubba's back, literally, and writes love letters to Jenny. One day, after going through thick and thin with Forrest, Bubba asks him to partner up on a shrimping business. Forrest agreed. However, destiny disagreed. The very next day, their platoon was ambushed. Just bullets flying everywhere, and not a single enemy face was ever shown. A directing decision that was applauded by the Vietnam veterans who were well aware of the Viet Cong partisan tactics. Lieutenant Dan, a man who was preparing for this moment his entire life, cracks under pressure and starts making completely irrational decisions. Forrest again adapts to whatever life throws at him. He uses every ounce of his incredible composure and athleticism and runs to the beach where he should be safe. But when he gets there, it is empty. Forrest consciously chooses to risk his own life to save his best friend. Watching this scene with my mom when I was 4 years old is my oldest clear memory. I vividly remember how torn my emotions and thoughts were when Forrest couldn't find Bubba and found another soldier in dire need of help. To this day, whenever I watch this scene, I always ask myself if I would have it in me to help others in such grave danger. Bubba's passing was and forever will be one of the saddest departures of a character from the small screen. The Vietnam chapter ends, and better days are to follow. So, this seems like a reasonable time to discuss the movie's soundtrack. It consists of 34 songs, all bar one of which were already American classics. My top 3 from the bottom up are San Francisco by Scott McKenzie, Sweet Home Alabama by Lynyrd Skynyrd, and California Dreamin' by the Mamas and the Papas. The album peaked at number 2 on the Billboard 200 albums chart. For all the horror he's been through, the bullets, the mud, and the rain, even getting shot in his buttocks, Forrest was happy to take, once again, whatever life had in store for him. And this time, it was ice cream. All the ice cream he wanted. However, not everyone would accept the ice cream, nor reality for that matter.
Lieutenant Dan, ice cream.
Lieutenant Dan was adamant that he was robbed of his destiny. In his mind, he was supposed to end on a battlefield as his ancestors did before him. Crippled and robbed of his destiny, he would use alcohol to defend himself from reality. On the other hand, Forrest would be rewarded a Medal of Honor. Forrest would again be called to meet the president, this time Lyndon B. Johnson. After that, Forrest would accidentally end up at an anti-war march on the Pentagon rally. When his time came to speak to the crowd, a saboteur unplugged the sound system. I remember always being frustrated at not hearing what he had to say. A few years ago, I found a Tom Hanks quote in which he reveals his lines. He said, "Sometimes when people go to Vietnam, they go home to their mamas without any legs. Sometimes they don't go home at all." That's a bad thing. That's all I have to say about that. I'm not sure if that's considered canon, but as far as I'm concerned, it is, as that is precisely something Forrest would say. He wouldn't concentrate on the politics, nor the financial aspect of the war. He would simply tell what happened to young men on that beach that day. I'm not very romantic, but what follows next is one of the most romantic reunions on film.
Get
However, after all the free ice cream and meeting Jenny, life would again show its uglier side. As we discover, Jenny has become a drug addict. She hangs with ideologues and is in an abusive relationship. Forrest beats the bejesus out of this woman beater and tells him exactly where Jenny's place is.
You should go home to Greenbow, Alabama!
As Forrest and Jenny part, we realize she won't stop her destructive ways. Trivia time. When the studio imposed budget cuts, both Tom Hanks and the director Robert Zemeckis waived a large part of their fee in exchange for percentage points, which ultimately netted Hanks in the region of $40 million. There's a phrase, always keep your eyes on the ball, and no one ever took that more literally than Forrest. One day, while recovering from a shot buttocks, one of the veterans told Forrest to pick up a racket and try ping pong, a veteran's favorite pastime. As is often the case, Forrest found himself in an industry he knows nothing about. There was only one thing he knew. Always keep your eyes on the ball. Like with everything else, Forrest would dedicate himself fully. He practiced day in and day out. He would play other veterans whenever he could, and when no one was around, he would play against the table. But whatever he did, he never took his eyes off the ball. That got Forrest onto the national ping pong team and sent all the way to compete in China at ping pong diplomacy matches. I'll take a slight detour and explain what ping pong diplomacy means. See, back in the early 70s, the world wasn't as connected as it is today. It would be an understatement to say there was a certain amount of animosity between China and the USA. In order to break barriers and ease tensions, the two countries agreed to exchange ping pong players for some big tournaments. The missions were widely praised, both in real life and in the movie. Forrest became a star and was even invited on the Dick Cavett show. The theme of the episode was love for a fellow man, as Forrest sat beside fellow humanist and one of the most remarkable musicians of all time, John Lennon. Forrest explains to Dick and John how people in China have no possessions and don't go to church. That inspired John to write, arguably, his greatest masterpiece. As he exits the studio, Forrest runs into Lieutenant Dan, who drank himself into oblivion. Lieutenant Dan is a shell of a man. His mental and emotional issues far outweigh his physical problems. He is showing classic signs of depression and PTSD. By all accounts, this is a realistic depiction of the Vietnam veterans' struggles. When soldiers are needed, they are asked to sacrifice an arm and a leg for their country. Literally, once they can no longer operate in the military, they are cast aside and neglected. Lieutenant Dan was a man so devoid of faith. When Forrest tells him of his and Bubba's plan to go into the shrimping business, Lieutenant Dan laughed and jokingly remarked that if Forrest were ever a shrimping boat captain, he would be his first mate. If Bubba's death is the saddest scene in the film, Forrest and Lieutenant Dan celebrating New Year's is undoubtedly the most depressing. On the plus side, if you ever feel down in the dumps for New Year's, watch this scene on YouTube and pay a visit to the comment section. It is full of people sharing their hopes and troubles and encouraging each other to rise above. Forrest's ping pong success eventually led to a meeting with President Richard Nixon. That would be the third and final time Forrest meets the President of the United States. Forrest is given a room in the Watergate complex, where he unwittingly exposes the Watergate scandal that led to Nixon's impeachment. Forrest would meet the man with the so-called most important job in the world for the third time, only for the latter to spiral downwards. That again illustrates that a so-called limited man like Forrest can excel perpetually if their character is true. Meanwhile, no position of power is big enough to protect one from foolish decisions. Forrest found his home full of memorabilia from his ping pong playing days when he returned home. His mom convinces him to take the $25,000 sponsorship for Gump Mao ping pong paddles. At first, he was reluctant, but eventually he agreed. He took his mom to a real nice dinner and bought a suit, a new haircut, a bus ticket, and 3 Dr. Peppers, at which point he was left with $24,562.47, which he spent on a brand new shrimping boat. When someone pointed out it was bad luck to have a boat without a name, Forrest named it after Jenny, which he calls the most beautiful name in the wide world. Unbeknownst to Forrest, Jenny had descended into a life of drugs, sexual promiscuity, and had even contemplated. That is a critical juxtaposition and a reminder never to think too little of yourself. Even if you're appalled at your life choices, there might be someone who thinks the world of you. Sometime later, Forrest is joined by Lieutenant Dan, who, as a man of his word, has come to be Forrest's first mate, just as he said he would be on New Year's Eve of 1971. One part of this movie that isn't praised enough is the terrific job the visual effects team did with Lieutenant Dan's legs. The CGI removal of actor Gary Sinise's legs was achieved by wrapping his legs with a blue fabric, which later facilitated the work of the Rotopaint team to paint out his legs from every single frame. Their initial shrimping success was as dismal as one might expect.
Still no shrimp, Lieutenant Dan.
2 shrimping newbies, one of which is a guilt-ridden cripple and the other, well, Forrest. It's no surprise their best catch in weeks was an old boot. Every time I watch this part, I feel the dynamic between Forrest and Dan inspired the book Freak the Mighty. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can either read the book or, better yet, watch its movie adaptation from 1998 called The Mighty. Trust me, there are very few movies with a similar spirit to Forrest Gump, and The Mighty is definitely one of them. Back on the boat, Lieutenant Dan was having a faith crisis, and just as he was about to lose all hope, a miracle happened. You see, the 2 of them were the only shrimpers who didn't know where to shrimp. So when Hurricane Carmen hit the regular shrimping spots, all the shrimpers who knew anything about the business got wiped out.
Destroying nearly everything in its path. And as in other towns up and down the coast, Biola Battery's entire shrimp.
With no competition whatsoever, Forrest and Lieutenant Dan dominated the shrimping industry. They bought, 11 more boats, all named Jenny. Everything seemed perfect for a while. Lieutenant Dan made peace with God and finally expressed gratitude for being saved. One morning, a terrible message reached Forrest. His mother was sick. She had enough time to explain one final thing to Forrest. She taught him death is a part of life. She died on Thursday. That's all Forrest had to say about that. After her passing, Forrest felt like staying in Greenbow, Alabama, and since his shrimping business made him wealthy, he volunteered to cut grass for free. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Dan participated in a substantial investment into what Forrest says to be some kind of fruit company. In reality, the company was the fledgling Apple computers. Many people misinterpret this scene though. It is widely understood Forrest and Lieutenant Dan's net worth increased dramatically. And while that is true, people often overlook that. It is implied that Apple computers only survived thanks to Lieutenant Dan's investment. That means Forrest is the reason some of you have iPhones today. Forrest was not one to forget his vows when he got rich. Without Bubba, he would never have even considered shrimping. His company was even named Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, and as far as Forrest was concerned, Bubba was his full-fledged partner. So, every penny Bubba would have earned from shrimping and investments, Forrest gave to Bubba's mother. He even renovated a church he frequented and built a medical center in Bubba's hometown. What followed was the time Forrest described as the happiest time of his life. Jenny returned to Greenbow and they would live together for a while. One night, July 4th, 1976, the night of the US National Descent Show, Forrest asks Jenny to marry him, but she turns him down. Forrest replies, "I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is." They would make love, and early in the morning, unbeknownst to Forrest, Jenny would call a cab and run away. You'll see a lot of comments online criticizing Jenny's actions. I'm of the stance that we can't hold her accountable for emotional instability. She has been through the worst torment anyone could ever go through. And even so, she never wants to harm Forrest, nor anyone else for that matter. She can't stay still because her childhood instincts always scream she should run away. Forrest would now be more lonely than ever before. But one day, for no particular reason, he decided to go for a little run. So he ran to the end of the road. And when he got there, he thought maybe he'd run to the end of the town. And when he got there, he thought maybe he'd just run across Greenbow County. And he figured, since he ran this far, maybe he'd just run across the great state of Alabama. And that's what he did. He ran clear across Alabama. For no particular reason, he just kept on going.
I ran clear to the ocean.
And when he got there, he figured, since he'd gone this far, he might as well turn around, just keep on going.
When I got to another ocean, I figured since I'd gone this far, I might as well just turn back, keep right on going.
Over a 3-year running period, Forrest would attract media coverage and dozens of devout followers. He would inspire a nationwide jogging craze of the 78-79. During the run, he inspires the phrase "shit happens" to a bumper sticker salesman after stepping in a pile of dog poop. He also uses a yellow t-shirt provided by a designer to wipe off his face after being splattered by mud, and in the process he forms the iconic smiley face logo and tells the man to have a nice day. He had run for 3 years, 2 months, 14 days and 16 hours. And then, one moment, he decided he felt tired and wanted to go home. And just like that, Forrest ends his story to people at the bus stop.
Down that way.
Down that way.
It was nice talking to you.
It is utterly beautiful that we were there with Forrest on that bench, totally immersed in stories of his incredible adventures, and neither he nor we knew he was about to start his greatest adventure yet when he ran off that bench. As he reunites with Jenny, he is surprised to find out she has a son, a young boy named Forrest, named after his father. Forrest doesn't question Jenny's reasons for not telling him until now. All he wants to know is if the boy is more intelligent than he is. Before this video concludes, I decided to put one more piece of trivia in. The park bench Tom Hanks sat on for much of the movie was located in historic Savannah, Georgia at Chippewa Square. Since then, the fiberglass bench he sat on has been removed and placed in a museum to avoid being destroyed by bad weather or possibly stolen. The church where the feather first fell was about 100 yards down the street from the bench. To this day, the bench is held in the Savannah History Museum, Savannah, Georgia. Jenny tells Forrest she is sick and there is no cure. She proposes to him and he says yes. They return to Greenbow, where they have a quiet and intimate ceremony, attended only by a handful of family and friends. Among the attendees is Lieutenant Dan, who has titanium prosthetic legs, with his Vietnamese fiancée Susan. Lieutenant Dan has genuinely found peace. Forrest, Jenny, and their son would have about a year together. Jenny passed away on Saturday, March 22, 1982. Forrest has her buried under the tree where they played as children, where she taught him how to climb and he taught her how to swing. He then buys Jenny's childhood home where her trauma occurred and has it bulldozed to the ground. One day, Forrest is pondering at Jenny's resting place, pondering whether his mother was right when she said everyone has a destiny, or was Lieutenant Dan correct when he said people are just floating around, carried by life as a feather on a breeze. Forrest concludes it might be a bit of both. He has gone where the wind took him his entire life, but now, with his son, he has finally found his destiny to be the best father he can be. He says his goodbyes to Jenny, and if there's anything she needs, he wouldn't be far away. The movie ends with a throwback to the day that forever changed Forrest's life. The day Forrest entered that school bus and saw Jenny for the first time would be the most impactful day of his life. But now it is time for Forrest Gump Jr. to find his destiny, or just float like a feather on the breeze. That works too. I rewatched Forrest Gump recently and realized I never lived up to the ideals Forrest teaches us. I was always waiting for something to happen before I could be happy or do what I want to do. I can't fix my old mistakes, but I can try to do the right thing now. I always dreamed of making a YouTube channel where I would discuss movies, but I always postponed it. there would always be an excuse, whether it was lack of time due to real-life obligations or lack of money for good equipment. And there is an ever-present fear of people's reaction to my speech impediment. As you figured by now, the name of this channel isn't accidental. I really can't pronounce the letter on the screen, but Forrest Gump teaches us we sometimes need to go after our goals even when our talents seem too modest or our resources too limited. I'm trying to do that right now. You can help me by sharing the link to this video with your friends or family who love Forrest. I will upload another movie review in 20 days or so, and I think it will be about either Shawshank Redemption or Interstellar. If you're still here, talk to me. What scene is your favorite? Did Forrest Gump impact your life personally? Tell me all about it. This video is unlikely to reach even 100 views, so we can have the entire comment section all for ourselves. Take care.